All right, well, maybe I'll get started here with just a bit of housekeeping, and people will pop in as they're joining. So hi, everyone, welcome. It's great that you're able to join us here, and we have the recording going, so we'll be sure to post it and share and circulate. I know some people had some conflicting meetings tonight. So everyone will remain muted throughout the presentation, and we encourage you to write any questions that you have in the chat throughout the presentation. You're welcome to turn your video back on at the end of the presentation when the slides are done, and then we can see all your faces again. So we're going to run through some slides and take some pauses for a number of polling questions along the way. They'll pop up on the screen and I'll read out the question and give everyone a minute to make their selection. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Jenica Hunsinger. I'm the Ecological Forestry Coordinator with the Medway Community Forest Cooperative, and who you've been emailing as the Land Stewards Coordinator for the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust. As we go forward into this evening's discussion, I first just want to recognize that the lands we reside on and we steward, I'm based in the village of Caledonia in Gaspowick, or Southwest Nova Scotia. And today, over 65% of forested lands in Mi'kma'ki are privately owned. And on a path of reconciliation, and as we're addressing private lands tonight, we're speaking of the lands, the forests, the water, and the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So Mary Jane will be presenting this evening and bringing us all up to speed around this new land trust. Mary Jane has been managing the MCFC for over 7 years, demonstrating alternatives to Crown land forest management in Nova Scotia to support our local communities through sustainable and ecologically based forest management. And she'll share a bit more about how the trust, the land trust, has developed from MCFC and with partners. And with that, I'll pass it off to her to get things started.
Thanks a lot, Jenica, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. We're really excited to share this initiative with you all, and something we've been working on for quite a few years now. So I'll jump in. So as Jenica mentioned, I'll be giving a presentation, and then we'll be following up with a Q&A, hopefully keeping things around an hour. I know there'll probably be lots of questions coming in, so things that we don't get to, we could always respond to afterwards. So within the presentation, I'm going to be covering a wide variety of topics surrounding both the land trust as well as kind of our carbon agreements, as well as our partners, and talking about next steps. So I'll dive right in. So let's start by just kind of considering why we might build a working woodlands trust. So basically, this kind of question that we've come to now in Nova Scotia is that a lot of our population that owns woodlands, or our woodland stewards, age. There's a huge intergeneral transfer of land assets to their kin. A lot of the time when that happens is when we often see liquidation, unsustainable forest practices happen on these lands, and a land trust really helps build the mechanism to prevent that. So there are kind of a three primary scenarios that we often see in this land transfer. Often displaced from the forest, the new owners are seeking economic returns from the woodlot and often sell it to the highest bidder. They might have unclaimed income through capital gains that would fall on the laps of new landowners and be forced to cut a large portion of their woodlot. Or the current owners simply liquidate the woodlot to pay for retirement, vacation, or large purchases. So this all results in kind of what we see here as the three main issues that a land trust might avoid. So as you can see, the large clear cut here, we're all familiar with this kind of scene in rural Nova Scotia. That's a boundary line to boundary line clear cut that is largely seen as unsustainable and will really impact the ecological integrity of that landscape. We also see a lot of lands converted to agriculture, particularly This may not be as much as an issue for us in southwestern Nova Scotia, but I know many of you across the province might see this more actively, oftentimes for blueberry production. And then we see subdivision, and subdivision is happening at a faster and faster rate now that those from away have discovered Nova Scotia, and we see areas like here in LaBelle, Malega Lake area, which is just across the way from me here in Lunenburg County, being subdivided and also having severe impacts on ecological integrity. So our vision is really for a working woodlands trust or working forest land trust that helps the community, the environment, and woodlot owners. So the direct impacts that would help the community and the environment is to build long-term economic assets that will help encourage or sustain income from private individuals over the course of time. So instead of liquidating those woodlots, we're maintaining forest cover. We're also, of course, promoting landscape connectivity and improving the health of Nova Scotia's watersheds. We're also really aiming to promote ecological forestry as a concept, particularly through practices known as improved forest management, which is directly tied to carbon credits, and climate adaptive silviculture. So focusing on diversity in forest stands and adaptability to climate impacts. Next, for our woodlot stewards, we're actually providing an alternative option to conservation-based land trusts. We know many of you are in support of conservation land trusts, as are we, but often the eligibility requirements are fairly restrictive. So this kind of opens up options for woodlot stewards that otherwise wouldn't be able to kind of get into the traditional land trust model. We're also still allowing for sustainable timber harvest, as well as non-timber forest products that abide by the terms that are approved within the easement agreement and tied to a management plan. We're also going to be providing access to carbon markets. So through legally binding easements, we're providing security to enter carbon markets, as well as building and amassing a pool that will help woodlot owners access carbon markets together. So it's very difficult for someone to access carbon markets as an individual, but if you have an aggregated pool, those markets become much more readily available. We also, this is kind of the keystone of the working forest easement, is we integrate current woodlot owner values or current woodlot steward values into the long-term stewardship of that woodlot. So no matter who owns the woodlot, your legacy, your stewardship legacy that you enact when you sign the terms of that easement will be on that woodland in perpetuity. So our vision of the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust really acts to complement traditional conservation-focused land trusts. And we're maintaining permanent forest cover in perpetuity through an act known as the Community Easements Act. So the Community Easements Act was originally instated, I believe, in 2012, and has within its purpose statements that working forests is kind of one of these designated purposes that can be utilized within the act. So there's no existing group that acts to manage working forest easements, but we kind of are hoping to fill that niche. We're also going to be providing, as an organization, long-term stewardship and monitoring programs that will ensure that future woodlot stewards are following the terms that are within the easement. So in order for us to make sure that these easements are perpetual and are thriving, we need to kind of enact an annual monitoring plan and visiting properties and engaging what activities have gone on and what are actually allowed within the easement. We're also hoping to create a mechanism for acquisition for the purchase of woodlands, and of course, providing woodlot owners with access to carbon markets. So Jenica touched on this briefly in her introduction, and I think many of you would be aware of the Medway Community Forest Cooperative and kind of our role as a key player in the ecological forestry game as a Crown land licensee. So Our organization was formed in 2014, and we've always kind of had within our mission and objectives that we were hoping to serve woodlot owners. We've acted to date kind of as a supporter or partner in the development of the Western Woodlot Service Cooperative, as well as we provided different woodlot management kind of consulting services through integrated pest management plans, particularly related to hemlock woolly adelgid, and different things like that. But we were kind of thinking that and hearing from woodlot owners that was really a gap in woodland stewardship. So we've always intended to help private woodlot stewards in some way, and the development of a working forest land trust to help woodlot owners access carbon markets has just kind of fit really nicely within our objective. And you know, we've been ambitious enough to try and start a new organization out of kind of this incubator at the MCFC. So our team, we have a really great team of individuals from across the province and representing woodlot stewards as well as woodlot stewardship organizations. So within our core team at the Medway Community Forest Co-op, there's myself. I'm actually departing the role come May, but Jenica has been the main point of contact for most of you, so she'll kind of be taking the reins on leading this initiative moving forward. It's been really great to have talked to you all and to kind of help move this initiative forward, but I'm unfortunately moving on. And we also have a dedicated operations manager, Matthew Miller, who's a multi-generational woodlot owner from Pictou County, who's helping a lot with our forest operations. On our executive, we have Don Kimball from Queens County, who's a woodlot steward, Katie McLean, who's an employee of the Clean Annapolis River Project and also the MCFC chair, Andrew Oliver, who's a staff member at the Western Woodlot Services Co-op. We have Jim Croker, a longtime supporter of the MCFC and a woodlot steward, Colin Gray from the Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute, Pat Wiggin from the Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners, Donna Croslin, representing the Healthy Forest Coalition, and Kristen Campbell from the Cape Breton Private Lands Partnership. So something worth mentioning that building a new land trust or building a new land stewardship organization, we're really hoping to go above and beyond and meet kind of some of our objectives for reconciliation and integrating Mi'kmaq values. So we're acknowledging that the conservation movement in Canada has largely benefited from the appropriation of Indigenous lands, and that colonial systems have historically created limited access for Indigenous peoples to access private lands. So in this respect, we're hoping to take action and educate ourselves and our land stewards with kind of these disparities and to listen to our Indigenous partners. We're also hoping to promote traditional use on easement properties and integrate two-right seeing into management practices. We also hope to create opportunities for woodland stewards who might be interested to donate their lands to the Mi'kmaq and promote open access for a traditional use. We're also just genuinely wanting to build relationships with the Mi'kmaq community, alleviate barriers, and make sure that we're having hard conversations along the way to make sure that we're acting in a spirit of reconciliation. So part of this spirit of reconciliation is also kind of acknowledging that the concept of woodlot owner isn't necessarily appreciative of the long-term Mi'kmaq values on these lands. So you might have noticed that I've been calling woodlot owners, or catching myself as much as possible and calling woodlot owners woodlot stewards, because I'm of the mind that using that expression is more inclusive, and considering that although you obviously have a relationship with the land as a private woodlot owner, oftentimes private lands were never legally ceded or sold to settlers. So we're simply asking private woodlot owners to reconsider their relationships with private land ownership as a concept, and instead vow to act as a steward of the forest and maintaining the resource for future generations, which I'm sure all of you are very much in support of. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. So I really want to kind of flesh out carefully this concept, and really it can be quite a, a mind bender, and has taken me and the staff of the MCA and our board quite a long time to really flesh out the idea in itself in order to make sure that this initiative will be successful. So we first kind of start off by asking woodlot owners the question of whether they want to continue to manage their land and have it sustainably managed in the future, or if they want their land conserved as wildlife habitat or sanctuary. So then we look at different options. So if they do want the latter, of want their land conserved, we then share resources with the woodlot owner regarding conservation-based land trusts. So not to basically take woodlot owners who might be more appropriate for organizations such as the Nova Scotia Nature Trust or the Nature Conservancy of Canada. We're trying to act in an inclusive way so we can share resources with those organizations. So if you are interested in sustainably managing your lands or looking for a more multi-value approach that is perhaps more human-centric or more socially centric, we would then encourage you to proceed with our initiative. So following kind of these early conversations that many of you have had, we're going to actually then go down a road of doing a property evaluation based on our acquisition criteria. So the reality is in the early days of building an organization, we are really most interested in woodlots that have a certain kind of mature forest cover, over 50 acres, and I'll get into the details kind of more specifically on acquisition later, but we do have certain requirements in order to actually move forward with an easement agreement in these early days. So there are also options then of whether a woodlot owner wants to continue to own their land or perhaps wants to sell or donate their land back to the land trust. And both of these has slightly different pathways. So if you do want to continue to own your land, we're then going to enter into an information gathering stage. We're going to discuss our long-term objectives and the potential agreed practices that would go into the easement agreement, which is essentially what can and cannot happen on the woodlot in the long term. We then go into a process of appraising the woodlot, checking boundary lines, and if necessary, subdividing the house or the residential, any sort of residential buildings from the woodlot itself. We then go into a process of completing a baseline report, a carbon inventory, and if you don't already have a management plan, going into the process of developing a management plan. So all of this is done through partners and mostly financed through the land trust itself. We do ask woodlot owners to help finance their management plans, since there are numerous different programs out there these days that provide subsidies in actually gaining management plans. So then we enter into and start considering the terms within a carbon agreement as well as an easement agreement. So there are two agreements that we're talking about here, which I will get into further detail later. So one would be the carbon agreement, which is on a 40-year timeline, and the other would be the easement agreement, which is of course in perpetuity. The carbon agreement has to be signed prior to the easement agreement in order to prove that the management practices that the carbon agreement is placing onto the woodlot is additional to what would be the status quo. Then once we've entered all of the legal agreements, we just simply go ahead with ongoing stewardship and monitoring completed by the land trust, and kind of keeping in contact with our landowners and making sure that they're happy with the terms of the easement. And then of course, some communication with future landowners if the land were to change hands. So we look at a bit of a different scenario if you as the woodlot steward would like to sell or donate their land. We go through the same property evaluation and appraisal process, and then we simply go into the ongoing annual monitoring and stewardship. So now Jenica is going to jump into our first three poll questions.
All right, let me just get the first one going here. So you should see it pop up. have you been working with anyone who has advised you on woodlot succession planning? And so we have over half people have submitted. I'll just give about a minute for everyone to get their answer in.
It looks like we have another red line, Jenica.
I mean, I think it's what makes a really successful presentation is to have the added art.
Just make sure when you're going to answer the questions, you do not have to hit annotate. You just simply have to move your cursor up and to make the choice.
Okay, we've got almost everybody there. I'm not sure. I think Anne was saying she was having trouble clicking it, so I'm not sure if she got to select. I don't know how it differs from different computer screens or tablets.
Well, I can't see my cursor either, so I'm with Anne here.
All right, I'm going to close this one and we'll go to our second question here. What best describes your woodlot succession plan? All right, so I'll just give a few more seconds there for a couple more people to submit. All right, I'm going to close this one. And our third question here, what concerns you most about your woodlot changing hands? All right, and just about everyone has got this one done pretty quick, so I'll just give a few more seconds here. All right, I'm going to close this one up.
Great.
All right.
I will carry on. Right. There we go. Okay. So to jump back in, I've mentioned a bit about what a working forest easement actually is. So as I mentioned earlier, a working forest easement is tied to the Community Easements Act. So it's a legally binding document that's held within an eligible body. So an organization that's been approved through the Community Easements Act to hold community easements. It outlines restrictions and or allowances regarding future land use. Specifically for us, those would really be that future property development, natural resource extraction, and then allow for the land trust or the eligible body to access the woodlot to complete annual stewardship and monitoring. So I'll reiterate that easements are tied to the deed of the property, no matter who owns it in perpetuity. So it's up to us as a land trust to be doing very active outreach and communication with new landowners so that infractions don't occur when land changes hands. We'll also mention that we're actually not meant to be a forest management organization. We will be working with the woodlot service organizations that already do forest management very, very well within the province and helping kind of alleviate kind of some staff pressure as we get launched. So I mentioned earlier, there are specific agreed practices that are laid out within the easement that actually say what you can and can't do on the property in perpetuity. So there are 3 types of uses. There are permitted uses. They are allowed to occur at any time with no notification. There are restricted uses, which require a 60-day notice. And there are prohibited uses. So there are uses that are absolutely off limits, no matter what. So permitted activities might include hiking, trail clearing, some non-commercial uses such as foraging, and motorized vehicle use on designated areas. Restricted activities would be such things as forest harvesting, new road constructions, which just require a 60-day notice period so that the land trust can kind of keep track of what activities are going on easement properties. And then there are prohibited activities, which are as land conversion, subdivision, unsustainable forestry practices, commercial mining, if you were as an individual were taking it on yourself, or new residence construction. So you might be a little bit wary of some of these practices, but we're going to get into kind of some workarounds of how you can continue to have, more multiple values on your woodlot moving forward while still abiding by the terms within the easement. So I'll first mention, what is our definition of ecological forestry? So what can and can't occur? You say that we're allowed to do sustainable forestry. What exactly does that mean? So really our vision of sustainable forestry really and ecological forestry really draws from what we've done at the MCFC for 7 years now. So merchantable and non-merchantable forestry activities in silviculture that consider climate adaptivity, so maintain diversity, maintain biodiversity features, and maintain and kind of mimic what would naturally occur, say for a disturbance like a hurricane were to go through the landscape. Anything that's prohibited on the easement property, so what we wouldn't consider ecological forestry are, first and foremost, activities that aren't outlined within the management plan. The management plan is tied to the easement agreement so that all parties know what is and isn't allowed in terms of forest harvesting. Basically, we're defining this as anything that might be ecologically inappropriate, or kind of set the stage back in terms of forest succession. So clear cutting, overstory removal, salvage harvest, or anything that would remove kind of any sort of permanent retention features like wildlife trees. So one thing that we've kind of adapted that helps inform the agreed practices is land zoning. So this is actually laid out within the baseline documentation report that's filed with your original easement agreement. So that baseline report really gives the condition of the property at the time of easement. So we recognize that many woodlots are multi-value, multifunctional, and that there are areas within the woodlot that stewards might not wish to actually place under easements. So in order to alleviate the high costs associated with subdividing all of these little parcels within your woodlot, we're creating a land zone model that can simply be mapped out within the easement process. So alternative land zones might include agriculture use, so Christmas trees being one of them that I know many woodlot owners have in Nova Scotia, non-commercial aggregate use. So if you have a pit, that can be outlined within land zoning. And then recreational use that's outside the scope of permitted uses, such as camps or cabins. So this could also include, say you have a vision of 20 years down the line, you'd really like to put a camp right beside a lake or a river on your property. You could then create the land zoning from the outset of the easement so that, that would be able to get to be done later down the line. We're just going to quickly pull one more question. Well, no, we have many more, but next question.
Yeah, one more here. What do you currently use your woodlot for? And with this one, you can make multiple selections. So we've got over 70% of people have voted, but I'll just give a few more seconds. All right, looks like everyone who wanted to choose an option there has. And of course, if none apply, that's okay. No need to vote. All right.
Okay, I mentioned earlier that we have specific requirements related to acquisition criteria that we're looking for in woodlots that we're placing easements on. So from the outset, we are really looking for woodlots that are over 50 forested acres. The bigger, the better at this point, especially when it's tied to our carbon agreement, because that means the sooner we get more landowners online, the faster we can enter into our carbon agreement. We've also have the requirement of the woodlots being over 50% or more mature forest cover. So we're roughly classifying that as over 40 years of age. And the woodlot doesn't need to be managed in the past. It doesn't necessarily have to have the stewardship legacy that we're talking about, but it can be in a natural state. Our kind of nice to haves is that it might be in an area that has a large continuous forest cover. So maybe within a region that is particularly threatened by liquidation logging, or has a special conservation value. It also might provide public access to recreational infrastructure. You might have existing trails on your woodlot that the community uses. And it also likely has minimal human structures separate from residential dwellings. So there's not, you know, sheds or vehicles or buses or whatever all over the woodlot. It's largely, you know, maintains that ecological integrity. So I mentioned that there are two key components to kind of the meat and potatoes of the easement agreement, aside from the agreed practices. One being the baseline report, which is actually tied to the easement agreement itself. And it is a static document that's tied to the easement agreement and provides insights to the current and historic land uses. So really that like baseline for future practices. So when we go and do the annual monitoring stewardship, we know where the woodlot was at the onset of the easement. And then we also are very dedicated to having a management plan provided through our service partner organization. We will be requiring, just for ease of developing this carbon project, FSC certified plans. And don't fear if your management plan isn't FSC certified. It's very easy to upgrade it. We are asking that the plans are less than 5 years old and written by an approved partner, and all plans are required to be on a 10-year renewal cycle. And I'll reiterate that only the management treatments that are recommended in the plan can actually be implemented on the property. Our next 3 poll questions.
All right, and thanks everyone for participating. It's really helpful to have you guys involved here. It would be a bit chaotic to unmute everyone and allow an open floor. So this is a great way. Question 5 is, if you'd like to participate, what is the area of your woodlot?
And we'll reiterate that all of the answers are provided anonymously. So we don't necessarily know who is saying what.
All right, just about everyone has voted there, so I'll just give a few more seconds. And I managed to get rid of the red lines, 2 years into Zoom meetings, and I'm still learning new things. So. All right, let's switch. So we have a 2-part question. Does your woodlot have a management plan? And if yes, is that a certified management plan? So only if you're answering yes to the first one, do you hop to the second question there? I'll just give a few more seconds here. Okay, yeah, no trouble. Everyone has to submit both. So you may have to just hit no for the second question there. All right. Oh, there's still a few more trickling in, so I won't rush anybody. All right, and we will flip to question 7 here. All right. What statement best reflects your interest in the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust? All right, looks like just about everyone's got their vote in. I'll just give a few more seconds here. All right, thanks everyone for your votes. It's really helpful. I'll pass it back to Mary.
Great, thanks, Jenica. So I mentioned earlier that we're working with many trusted woodlot service providers, and I just wanted to give a little layout of who exactly those were. I'm imagine a lot of you actually learned about this evening through some of these organizations. So it's just the few kind of woodlot service co-ops that exist throughout the province are all of our partners. So the Western Woodlot Service Cooperative, North Nova, Cape Breton Private Lands Partnership, Nova Scotia Landowners and Forest Fiber Producers, Athol Forestry, and the Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners. So we really have the whole province covered. And we'd like to reiterate that these are the organizations that really will be helping facilitate the management on properties. So in the same way that they already do. So if you already have a management plan with one of these organizations, you probably ask them to help you organize some of your silviculture activities or forest harvesting or log marketing or whatever it might be. And that relationship will continue to remain the same. It's just an easy way for us to kind of maintain quality with management plans and working with organizations that we know are facilitating ecological forestry. I'll also mention that we're a member of the Family Forest Network, which is an initiative of the Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners and Operators Association, which is helping pilot ecological forestry on small private woodlots. So we'll talk a bit about next about the actual endowment structure, because as you might have guessed, long-term land conservation is expensive. And we've grappled for quite some time on how to make this work, in consideration that probably most of you don't want to kind of write off the long-term, economic plan you might have had for your woodlot and then also pay us $20,000 to help steward it in perpetuity. So the cost of an endowment, which is typically by most land trusts raised through fundraising, is largely dependent on the woodlot area and the likelihood of an infraction. So an infraction is basically when a woodlot owner were to violate the terms that are within those agreed practices. So the primary costs associated with calculating endowment are the annual monitoring costs. So sending our staff out on an annual basis to go visit the property and make sure that everything's in order and chatting with the woodlot steward, and then some liability costs, because realistically, if we're talking about stewarding lands in perpetuity, there will likely be some sort of infraction at some point in another where we would have to go to court and pay for legal defense. So in the early days of building this organization, we did a large survey with some New England-based land trusts to determine what their average kind of endowment rate was. And it's roughly around $70 to $150 an acre. So it is considerable, but we have thought of a way to help pay for it. So our solution is really based on the carbon credit structure. So what we're looking to build is an aggregated pool of landowners that will help finance the expensive endowment costs associated with easements. So working with the developer, Finite Carbon, we're actually developing an aggregated carbon pool. So we're specifically looking right now for woodlot stewards that possess larger tracts of land that have an exceptional stewardship legacy. That's not to say that in the near future we won't entertain anyone within that kind of 50 acres and over. Just in these early days, we're really specifically looking for the larger the landowner for kind of our first pilot and for carbon. So the credits that are generated, the offsets that are generated through these carbon agreements will finance the cost of the endowment, as well as provide payment back to the woodlot owner. So this will actually end up looking like a 10,000 acre pool. So that is the minimum acreage required to kind of enter into one of these aggregated pool carbon agreements. So basically what this does, and I think I mentioned this, is like you as an individual woodlot owner, it would be very difficult for you to access carbon markets on your own, but as a group, we could then kind of have the purchasing power to go into a market and, be attractive to some of these large emitters that are looking to offset their carbon credits. So within the initial pool, we can actually add to the area of it for the first 2 years. So there are 2 agreements here that we're looking at. So rather than having you as the landowner deal with the developer, us as the aggregator is specifically the one that's entering the agreement with Finite, and then there'll be a subsequent agreement between us, the land trust, and the landowner to kind of help lay out the terms within the 40-year agreement. And this carbon agreement, as I said, precedes the easement agreement in order to make the case for additionality, which is basically to showcase that the carbon agreement is helping the woodlot go above and beyond in carbon sequestration. And I'll just mention and be clear that we were previously looking into a Southwest Nova Scotia pilot, but we're now looking at accepting properties from all over Nova Scotia. So everyone really just wants to know what the costs will be and what the payments will be. So we've kind of done a little bit of a rough estimate here of what the possible payouts might be. So really looking at some ranges, because we don't yet know exactly what the payment, the cost of carbon is constantly changing, largely on the increase, which is a benefit for everyone. So if we look at kind of a breakdown of the estimated payment structure, probably 40 to 50% of the payout is actually going back to the landowner, whereas we're looking at kind of about 30 to 35% in ongoing admin, marketing, insurance costs. So the developer actually takes a chunk back based on the work that they've put into marketing the carbon credits themselves. And then a portion, of course, goes into the endowment, so to help pay for that long-term stewardship of the property. We haven't yet determined exactly how the payment schedule might look, but there are many ways to kind of incentivize this over time. So a lot of the carbon agreements for aggregated pools pay out on the front end, but we'd like to, kind of keep an investment pot going and then help generate potentially more income for woodlot owners over time as a pool, since that would have more value and obviously more rate of return on the investment. So if we actually look on this as an example scenario woodlot, so let's take a 200 acre woodlot, how might this look? So basically what we can draw from the figures in the last slide is that the total value of this carbon offset for this 200 acre woodlot would be between $60,000 and $80,000. So remember, this is for a 40-year timeline. From that, about 22,000 would go into the endowment. So we go back into the trust to be held in trust and used to pay for that ongoing stewardship and monitoring. 15,000 would be going back to the developer and admin costs and insurance. 5,000 would be going into ongoing inventory costs. So throughout the term of the easement, you actually have to go and re-inventory. And that's about $20 an acre, $25 an acre kind of over the course of the entire easement. And that happens every 5 years. And then we're looking at $30,000 back into the pocket of the landowner. For woodlot owners who aren't as financially motivated or maybe are looking to help support the mission of the trust further, we're also looking at structures that would actually provide you with the ability to donate back your revenues to us as a land trust, or perhaps further an acquisition campaign where we could actually go and purchase woodlots that might be under particular threat to liquidation logging, or we could help provide a donation structure back to conservation or Mi'kmaq focused land trusts. So next, we're going to get you to answer questions. Last three, and then we can kind of roll into our Q&A period.
All right, question 8 should be up there on your screen now. What is the most important to you? And just to answer the last question that came there in the chat box about that last scenario of the 200 acres, all of those dollar figures were sort of for the cost of the endowment in perpetuity, and that all that carbon value is sort of for the entire 40-year agreement. So it's not an annual. So we've got just about everyone voted on question 8, and we'll just wrap it up in a second. All right, let's hop to question 9. So it pops up there. How would you describe your awareness of the various options to access carbon markets today? I'll give a few more seconds on this question.
There's a lot to read.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to close this one and we'll go to our last question in the polls. All right. Question 10, what are you most interested in putting the financial gains from carbon towards? And again, if one of these options doesn't suit you, then feel free to just skip this one. All right, we'll wait just a couple more seconds here for people to finish up and then we'll close the polls. It is 8 o'clock and I think we have a little bit more to cover. Yeah, the recording will be circulated to everyone who's registered. So you'll be able to, if you need to hop off, we understand, and you'll be able to view it later. And of course, this is hopefully just the beginning of a conversation and we can chat further and answer any of your questions down the line. All right, that's the polls.
Great. Okay, so to wrap up here, I'm just going to talk briefly about some of our next steps and some of the next steps for interested landowners. So if you are interested, what we need from you to kind of get going, and what I think we have from quite a few of you here today, is your contact information. So we do have a contact form on our website that you could fill in, and then Jenica will reach out to you directly, kind of ask you some questions about your property, including area, your PID, and if you have a management plan. What you can prepare for on your end is that we'll be going through an evaluation process to look at our acquisition criteria and if your woodlot fits that. Completing boundary line maintenance, always a good thing. Definitely a good thing if you're looking to enter into an easement agreement. Start thinking about your land zoning. So if there is somewhere on a map or something you want to draw on a map that you don't want included within your easement or have restrictions on, that's something to start thinking about. And subdividing houses or structures from your woodlot if that's required. So unfortunately, we can't cover this cost, but I think quite a few of you don't have woodlots attached to your main residences. So hopefully that isn't too limiting. Procuring a management plan if you don't already have one or it's out of date. We could help you connect with woodlot service providers in your area to obtain a management plan. And as I mentioned earlier, those are available at a subsidized rate in most cases, probably only requiring you to pay about 25% of the actual cost for that plan. And then once we kind of have all of these things ironed out, we ask that you obviously review the easement and carbon agreements with your lawyer. We cannot pay for this because we think that it is the landowner's responsibility to make sure that everything is right according to you and that you feel comfortable with what we're entering into because these are long-term commitments and we want to make sure that everyone is clear and transparent throughout the process. So for us as an organization, some of our next steps is we're working right now to finalize our actual easement agreement. We've been working with a lawyer over the past 6 months in doing so, and we're nearly there. We've also been working with a strategic planner, and we're looking to complete that process this spring. And then we have been waiting for some time to become an eligible body under the Nova Scotia Community Easements Act. We actually don't need this in order to start the process of entering into carbon agreements. So those can kind of start happening as soon as we have our 10,000 acre pool. So then that will kind of draw into kind of our spring and summer work, where we're looking to market and engage with our champion woodlot owners, do a targeted marketing campaign, and help recruit woodlot stewards to our aggregated pool. And then we're hoping to kind of start signing agreements come the fall and winter, and continuing active recruitment and landowner outreach. So that is all I have today. I think Jenica mentioned too that this is an ongoing conversation. So if you have questions afterwards that you didn't feel comfortable asking this evening, please feel free to reach out. As well, we will be likely holding another one of these information sessions kind of in the next couple months. So that will provide an additional opportunity to gain more information. I'll see if I could stop sharing, and then maybe we could jump into a little Q&A period. Oh.
All right, I think most of the questions got answered throughout the presentation. There's a few more rolling in now that we can chat through. So Peter asked, who would be responsible for property taxes? What enrollment insured property is assessed as a forest resource property?
Yes. Yeah, so the property taxes are still on the landowner, but because the property has a management plan, it would continue to be, and provided that we are encouraging active management of those properties, it would be taxed under a forest resource property.
So there's a couple more questions there. Can a property be encumbered by a mortgage or a loan? And does it prevent capital gains from income taxes?
That's a very good question. So as far as I'm aware, if you have a mortgage or loan on your property, it doesn't completely exclude you. That's really something I would need to clarify with our lawyer. And the second part, Jenica, was?
Does it prevent creating capital gains for
Right.
income taxes?
So because there is some transition planning, there would be some, it would control capital gains to some extent. It's not the same. Because we chose the route of going, moving forward as a not-for-profit rather than a charity, we actually aren't able to, many land trusts are actually able to issue charitable receipts. Because of the whole concept of providing income back to the woodlot owner through the carbon agreement, CRA was not super keen on our charitable application. So there is a caveat kind of there in that, you know, we cannot issue charitable receipts through kind of the eco gift program, which many land trusts access, which is a federal program, and really great in terms of limiting capital gains. So I think working with your lawyer in transition planning would help limit the impacts of capital gains, really is what I would advise.
That's great. And Amanda added, I'm interested in hearing more about how easements can allow for use by Mi'kmaq people and what that could look like, which is a great point to make. And as a community easement, sort of the landowner has that say in who can use their land and what for. She also asked, does the land need to be surveyed?
No, the land doesn't have to be fully surveyed as long as there is a clear delineation of the property boundaries, as well as a clear delineation of the property within the deed.
And another question is about the Community Easement Act itself. And Anne has said, governments do strange things. What happens if the government changes the act?
Well, the terms within the easement agreement would remain the same. So I don't think that would drastically impact the terms within the easement, because the actual document that the landowner is signing with us as an eligible body relates to, you know, that would not be changing. So the contents of the act itself is more outlining kind of the purpose statement and what organizations are actually designated to hold community easements. So I think that would be highly unlikely to actually impact the terms.
There's a question of, can the easement be for a limited term or must it be forever?
There are some organizations that have like 100-year outlooks, but we've kind of decided that perpetuity is most fitting for us in terms of talking about forest stewardship.
And David is just noting the sort of necessity and urgency for protecting smaller woodlots or different sized woodlots, and us looking into options to be a bit more flexible there. And I hope people will understand the sort of initial launch and the going forward to incorporate smaller properties. Or Mary Jane outlined that there's 2 years after that initial carbon pool where you can add on other additional properties. And there may be some more opportunities down the line.
Yeah.
That's all the questions that are in the chat box right now. Doesn't mean you'll be more than welcome to submit a question by email or give us a call sometime as well.
And I can definitely circle back on some of the questions related to capital gains. We're very, very fortunate to have a pro bono lawyer on our team who's been very, very helpful with the development of our easement agreement. So having that legal assistance has been really invaluable in creating this entity. So we are also really open to your feedback and your questions, as Jenica mentioned. Moving forward, we're still learning. There's a lot to kind of move forward here, but we're really, really excited of making it happen and really excited of hearing feedback from you as well.